Hi, this is Michael Altos. We're continuing our discussion of neuromuscular blocking agents and reversal drugs. This is recording part 2.
First, let's talk about some principles of non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agents. These drugs also bind to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, but they cannot induce ion channel opening. So they're not agonists, they're competitive antagonists. They bind to a subunit of the acetylcholine receptor, and by doing so, they prevent acetylcholine from binding, and that's how they cause paralysis. Again, because they're antagonists, the receptor is not activated, no end plate potential is generated, and no fasciculations occur. These drugs are divided into two categories, the benzoisoquinolines, or the curiums, and the steroidals, the curoniums. These drugs have a slower onset of action and a longer duration compared with depolarizing agents like succinylcholine. If you increase dosing, you can speed up the onset time, but of course this will lead to a more prolonged recovery time. Some people have described giving a priming dose, which would be 10% of the intubating dose, administered 5 minutes before induction. But of course, this has side effects of anxiety, dyspnea, dysphagia, and even desaturation in some patients. Some people also use these drugs to give a defasciculating dose, which means giving 10% of the intubating dose of your non-depolarizer 5 minutes before administering succinylcholine. Again, the same side effects may occur, but this may prevent fasciculation that occurs with succinylcholine. It will also increase your required dose of succinylcholine to usually 1.5 milligrams per kilogram. Non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agents can be maintained throughout the anesthetic with intermittent boluses or by continuous infusion. These drugs are potentiated by inhalational anesthetics, with desflurane causing the most weakness, followed by sevoflurane, isoflurane, and then halothane. Other drugs that can potentiate these non-depolarizing agents include antibiotics like aminoglycosides, phenytoin, and magnesium. Other conditions that can prolong the action of non-depolarizing agents include hypothermia, acidosis, hypokalemia, and hypocalcemia. In general, these drugs will diffuse away from the neuromuscular junction over time and undergo redistribution, metabolism, and excretion. So theoretically, reversal would not be required. However, this process can be very slow, and typically we do use reversal agents, as we will discuss later on in the lectures.
The first drug we'll discuss is cisatracurium, or Nimbex. It's an intermediate acting agent. Its metabolism is by Hofmann elimination, which means it doesn't rely on pseudocholinesterase, and it doesn't rely on renal or hepatic elimination. This is felt to be the ideal drug in renal failure patients, although I personally don't like to use it because I don't think it's a very effective drug. It's also commonly used when a patient is on a paralytic infusion outside of the OR, for example, in the ICU. The intubating dose is 0.1 to 0.15 milligrams per kilogram with a 2 to 4 minute onset, lasting 35 to 40 minutes. The infusion is usually started at 1 to 3 mics per kilogram per minute. I should also highlight atracurium, an older version of cisatracurium. It's an isomer. It's also degraded by Hofmann elimination, and a second type of metabolism is through ester hydrolysis by nonspecific plasma esterases. One of the drawbacks of atracurium is that it's degraded into a substance called laudanosine, which can cause seizures, and acrylate. Patients who receive atracurium often experience hypotension and histamine release, especially at higher doses. Mivacurium is an agent that hasn't been around for some time, but is coming back into practice. It's the only short-acting, non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agent currently. It is metabolized by pseudocholinesterase, the same as succinylcholine. Yet, you can also reverse it with anticholinesterase drugs. It has a fast onset and it's short-acting. Its dose is 0.2 milligrams per kilogram with a 2 to 3 minute onset and a 15 to 20 minute duration. And the redose is 0.05 milligrams per kilogram every 15 minutes. It can trigger histamine release, especially at higher doses. Pancuronium, or Pavulon, is a long-acting non-depolarizer, and for that reason it can be more difficult to reverse than the other agents. It is 40% cleared by the kidneys and should be used with extreme caution in patients with renal failure. Pancuronium has the unique property that it increases heart rate, blood pressure, and cardiac output when it's given. Some people would say you should use this with caution in patients with coronary disease. The intubating dose is 0.08 to 0.12 milligrams per kilogram. I usually just think of it as 0.1. The onset is 2 to 4 minutes and it lasts 1 to 2 hours. The redose is a tenth of the intubating dose, about 0.01 milligrams per kilogram, every 20 to 40 minutes. Vecuronium is an intermediate agent, about 25% renally cleared. And traditionally, we have not adjusted the dose very much in renal patients. The intubating dose, same as pancuronium, about 0.1 milligrams per kilogram, with a 3 to 4 minute onset and a 35 to 45 minute duration. The redose, again, about a tenth of the intubating dose, every 15 to 20 minutes. And it can be run as an infusion, usually starting between 0.8 and 1.2 mics per kilogram per minute. Rocuronium, an intermediate agent, has the fastest onset of all the intermediate agents, and so that makes it the best choice for a rapid sequence intubation if you can't use succinylcholine and need to use a non-depolarizer. It does have fewer active metabolites than vecuronium, although in my personal experience it can be a little bit more unpredictable when it comes time to reverse patients. The intubating dose is 0.45 to 0.9 milligrams per kilogram with a 2-minute onset. You can shorten that to 90 seconds if you give 1.2 milligrams per kilogram, and it lasts 30 to 40 minutes. The redose, usually 0.15 milligrams per kilogram every 15 to 20 minutes, and it can also be run as an infusion starting at 10 to 12 mics per kilogram per minute. This diagram shows all of the non-depolarizers on one graph. Here we're showing the duration since the bolus and what the plasma concentration is. So we're seeing how the drug is metabolized. Here's succinylcholine, which has the most rapid decrease in concentration as a function of time. Mivacurium shortly behind it because it's short-acting. Then we have our intermediate agents, cisatracurium, rocuronium, and vecuronium. Cisatracurium has a different shape, possibly because of its metabolism. And pancuronium, by far the longest acting. Next, we're going to take a moment and discuss the principles of neuromuscular blocking agents and reversal. Let's talk about peripheral nerve stimulation. The idea is you've all seen a nerve stimulator, a twitch monitor, and we have a few different maneuvers that we can do with it. The simplest is a train of 4, which is 4 stimuli over the course of 2 seconds. The fade effect occurs with prolonged or repeated stimulation. So if you do a train of 4, you may see that the 4th beat is not as strong as the first one. And this is due to decreased acetylcholine available in the nerve terminal. And it's most obvious during tetanus. You can really see fade if you just hold tetanus, or if you do what's called a double burst, which you can see diagrammed here. And the second burst can be noticeably faded compared to the first one. Again, here's the train of 4 twitches over 2 seconds. And really, if you do it, you should wait 10 to 20 seconds before repeating to allow acetylcholine levels to get back to baseline. When we talk about the train of 4 ratio, we're comparing the intensity of the 4th beat to the first beat. Tetanic stimulation is a 50 or 100 hertz stimulus for 1 to 5 seconds. And then we have post post-tetanic potentiation, which means doing a 50 hertz tetany for 5 seconds, and then 3 seconds later doing a train of 4. And you may have a patient who has no train of 4 twitches, but after the post-tetanic potentiation, they have higher twitches than they had beforehand. So this is useful in cases when patients are so blocked their train of 4 is 0, and we want to see if they have even enough motor activity to get a post-tetanic twitch. And this is due to, why do we get the potentiation? Because calcium builds up in the presynaptic terminal when we do the tetany. The effect of post-tetanic stimulation can persist for at least 5 to 10 minutes. So if you've done it, you should know that all of your train of 4s are going to be abnormally elevated for a period of time. The double burst is 2 short bursts of 50 hertz separated by 750 milliseconds, and as we said, this may be the most sensitive for detecting fade. When we talk about neuromuscular blocking agents, we're talking about quaternary charged ammonium compounds that have affinity for the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. There are 2 kinds of neuromuscular blocking agents. The first are the depolarizers. These drugs look like acetylcholine, have a similar structure, and they are agonists. They bind to the acetylcholine receptor and activate it. They generate a muscle action potential. That's why we see fasciculations. And they are not metabolized by acetylcholinesterase. So that's why they continue to work longer than acetylcholine would. Usually when we use these drugs, we talk about phase 1 block. The drug binds to the receptor. The end plate cannot repolarize. The muscle becomes flaccid. And if you used a peripheral nerve stimulator, you would see a constant but diminished twitch with no fade and no post-tetanic potentiation. Looking back over here, here's our depolarizing block. And you see there's no fade, just a constant but diminished level of twitch. There's also phase 2 block, which you probably won't see very often. This is a prolonged depolarization from a depolarizer, which leads to an abnormal response to acetylcholine, and it looks like non-depolarizing block. Going back, you can see that pretty much all of the phase 2 responses are the same as non-depolarizing responses. So those are the depolarizing drugs. We also have non-depolarizing drugs. The non-depolarizers bind to the receptor, but they don't induce ion channel opening. They are competitive antagonists. They bind to a subunit of the acetylcholine receptor, so they block acetylcholine from binding, but they don't activate the receptor. So there's no end plate potential generated, there's no fasciculation, just flaccid paralysis. More than 70% of the receptors must be blocked before you start to see fade on the twitch monitor. And you may need more than 90% of the receptors to be blocked before you get complete twitch suppression. When we want to reverse patients, if the patient received a depolarizing agent, there's no reversal. You just wait for that agent to diffuse away from the neuromuscular junction, and then it gets hydrolyzed by plasma pseudocholinesterase. There's no reversal agent for phase 1 block. In fact, if you give an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor like neostigmine to try and reverse phase 1 block, you can actually make them worse. You can cause prolonged depolarization. Now, phase 2 block could be reversed with an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Non-depolarizing agents, if you wait long enough, they will eventually diffuse away from the neuromuscular junction, redistribute to other tissues, be metabolized and excreted. If we can inhibit acetylcholinesterase, this will increase the amount of acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction, and it will start to compete with the neuromuscular blocking drug, and that's commonly how we reverse neuromuscular blocking agents.
It's worth mentioning briefly a few comments about peripheral nerve stimulation. The 2 anatomic sites where we most commonly see people placing the peripheral nerve stimulator is on the hand at the ulnar nerve and at the facial nerve. The ulnar nerve causes a muscle response at the adductor pollicis muscle, which is thumb adduction. The correct placement is for the negative electrode to be 1 centimeter proximal to the wrist crease, and the positive electrode about 4 to 5 centimeters proximally from that, located along the ulnar surface of the forearm. Stimulation at the facial nerve is also done, but we need to appreciate that the muscles of the glottis, face, airway, and diaphragm are less sensitive to neuromuscular blocking agents than the thumb. In other words, the dose needed to block muscles of the airway, like the diaphragm, may be twice as much as the dose needed to block the adductor pollicis muscle at the thumb. Therefore, when you see recovery at the muscles around the eye, this may not reflect a degree of recovery that would allow safe extubation, and there's increased risk of residual paralysis.
We'll stop here with this recording. Please take a few moments to make sure you understand this material. Let me know if you have any questions.